The fluorescent hum of the library after hours, computers still logged in, was a constant, low thrum against the quiet that had settled like dust. I was the last one here, as usual. The cleaning crew wouldn't arrive for another hour, and the student assistants had long since locked up, leaving me in the echoing cavern of knowledge. My fingers, stained faintly with ink from earlier research, hovered over the keyboard. The screen glowed indifferent. Pages of architectural history, obscure land deeds, and forgotten family trees filled my browser tabs. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, not anymore, just looking. The air smelled of old paper, ozone, and the faint, lingering scent of antiseptic from the daily wipe-downs. It was a sterile, impersonal smell, a good match for the hollow ache that had been my constant companion for months. Since the loss, since the silence. I hadn't realized how much noise a single person could make in my life until that noise was gone, leaving only the ringing in my ears. My reflection stared back from the black glass of the monitor when I minimized a window. Gaunt. Eyes too wide, too tired. A shadow of the person I used to be. The determination I felt, the stubborn refusal to simply give in to the suffocating weight, was a quiet, internal thing, rarely visible on my face. It was the only thing that kept me coming to places like this, sifting through fragments of other lives, hoping to find some anchor for my own. A notification, small and insistent, flickered in the corner of the screen. An unread email, I almost dismissed it. Spam, probably. Another digital plea for money or a desperate attempt to sell me something I didn't need. But the sender's address was unfamiliar, a string of letters and numbers that held no commercial cadence. Curiosity, a faint spark in the ash of my apathy, pricked at me. I clicked. The subject line was stark, regarding the estate of Eleanor Vance. My breath hitched. Eleanor Vance, a great-aunt, I thought, or maybe a great-great. Someone I had met once, perhaps, at a family gathering when I was too young to recall her face, only a vague impression of soft hands and the smell of lavender. He was a footnote, a forgotten branch on a tree I rarely bothered to look at. The email itself was formal, almost stiff. It was from a solicitor, a firm based in a town I'd never heard of, hundreds of miles from here. It stated with a precision that felt clinical that I was the sole remaining heir to MS. Vance's estate. My mind stumbled over the words, sole remaining heir. What did that even mean? I had family, surely. Distant cousins, at least. But the email was unequivocal. My name, Seth, was there, bolded, underlined. Then came the address. A long, winding set of directions to a place called Blackwood Manor. Remote, the solicitor had emphasized. Very remote. And the final line delivered with a detached formality that sent a shiver down my spine. The property has been vacant for some time and requires significant attention. We await my instructions. Vacant, significant attention, a forgotten house for a forgotten heir. It felt like a cosmic joke, a cruel twist of fate, or perhaps a chance. My fingers, no longer hovering, typed the address into the search bar. The internet, that vast, indifferent ocean of information, pulled up an image, not a recent one. A faded photograph, grainy and indistinct, likely from an old real estate listing or a forgotten historical archive. Dormer windows, like watchful eyes, peered out from beneath thick eaves. There was no sign of life, no manicured lawn, just wild, untamed growth. It looked less like a home and more like a monument to something long dead. I zoomed in, trying to discern details, but the resolution was poor. It was isolated, utterly cut off. A place where grief could fester undisturbed. A place where new beginnings might be forged, or where old endings might finally claim their due. What secrets did it hold? What kind of life had Eleanor Vance lived in such a place? And why had she left it all to me, a man she barely knew, a man adrift in his own quiet despair? The hum of the computers, usually a comfort, now felt like a low, sustained growl. My own breathing sounded loud in my ears. It was a sense of being watched, not by anyone present, but by the house in the picture. I closed the email, then the browser. The screen went blank, reflecting my face once more. The gaunt features, the tired eyes. But now there was something else there, too. A flicker of something that wasn't quite hope, and wasn't quite fear. A strange, unsettling pull. What exactly awaited me in Blackwood Manor? My fingers, no longer numb, traced the edge of the printed document. A chance. The thought settled in my chest, heavy and strange, yet not entirely unwelcome. The silence of the library after hours, computers still logged in, hummed around me, a stark contrast to the buzzing uncertainty that had been my constant companion for months. I was tired of the silence, yes, but also of the clamor of my own mind. This house, this inheritance, felt like an anchor dropped into a churning sea. It was remote, yes, perhaps impossibly so, but remoteness was precisely what I craved. A place to truly be alone, to mend, or perhaps to simply fall apart without witnesses. I clicked through more satellite images, zoomed in on topographical maps. The nearest town, a cluster of a few dozen buildings, was a good 90 minutes away by car, and the last 10 miles looked like nothing more than a dirt track swallowed by dense, ancient woodland. Perfect. The drive took 2 days. 2 days of watching the landscape flatten and then rise, of seeing the familiar sprawl of highways dwindle into state routes, then county roads, and finally nothing but a ribbon of cracked asphalt threading through a deepening wilderness. The air grew cooler, heavier, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine needles. The isolation was absolute, a profound quiet that pressed in on the windows of my old sedan. Then the road ended. Or rather, it dissolved into a rutted track, barely wide enough for one car, overgrown with weeds that scraped against the undercarriage. I slowed, the engine groaning in protest. Very little light reached the forest floor. It was like driving into a tunnel, a green-black maw that seemed to swallow the last vestiges of the setting sun. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, a knot forming in my stomach. This was more remote than I had imagined, more primal, and there it was, the house. It didn't stand so much as loom, a hulking, skeletal silhouette against a bruised, twilight sky. The windows, countless and unblinking, were either shuttered tight or shattered, reflecting the dying light like vacant eyes. A vast, overgrown lawn, choked with thorny bushes and skeletal trees, sloped down to meet the track. No neatly trimmed hedges, no welcoming porch light. Just a decaying edifice, a monument to a forgotten past, slowly being reclaimed by the wilderness. I cut the ignition. The sudden, profound quiet was startling, almost painful. My breath hitched. It felt less like an inheritance and more like an accusation. I killed the engine, plunging myself into the absolute quiet. The air, thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, old wood, mildew, and a faint metallic tang, seeped through the vents. The lock, a rusty contraption of gears and bolts, groaned as I turned the key. It felt like I was waking something. A wave of stale, frigid air rushed out to meet me, carrying the concentrated scent of decay. Dust motes danced in the sliver of twilight that pierced the gloom, illuminated by my phone's weak flashlight beam. The entrance hall was vast, impossibly so, stretching into a murky distance. To my right, a series of closed doors, each one a promise of more forgotten spaces. The house felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum. Every step I took felt like an intrusion. The wallpaper, once a rich floral pattern, peeled in curling strips, revealing plaster stained with what looked like ancient water damage. Cobwebs, thick as shrouds, draped every corner, every forgotten chandelier. I passed through a cavernous drawing room, its furniture shrouded in white sheets that looked like ghosts frozen in time. I could feel the vastness of the place, the sheer number of empty rooms surrounding me, each one holding its breath. As I ventured deeper towards what I assumed was the back of the house, a faint sound reached me. I stopped, my heart giving a sudden, uncomfortable lurch. The sound seemed to come from directly ahead, from a long, unlit corridor. I held my breath, straining to hear it again. Nothing, only the thrumming of my own pulse in my ears. I dismissed it as the house settling, or perhaps just the wind playing tricks in the eaves. An old house, after all, that's when I saw it. Just a sliver, a thin line of black against black, but undeniably open. Or was I not truly alone? A chance. Here in the cool, stale air, amidst rows of forgotten knowledge, a new path had presented itself. The ancestral home, a place I'd never known, suddenly a beacon. I had to see it. I had to understand. My mind was made up. The glow of the monitor screens cast an eerie pallor over the empty desks, illuminating dust motes dancing in the faint currents of the ventilation system. A forgotten coffee cup sat beside a keyboard, a testament to the hurried departure of a colleague. I was alone, truly alone, in a way that had become both familiar and unsettling since everything. The weight of the inheritance papers felt heavier now, not just a curiosity, but a commitment. I folded them carefully, tucking them into my worn messenger bag. It was late, far later than I should have been lingering, but the determination that had solidified in my gut wouldn't let me leave until I had a clear course of action. I needed to pack. I needed to inform my landlord. I needed to prepare for a journey into the unknown. As I gathered my few belongings, a shadow flickered at the periphery of my vision, near the tall stacks of philosophy texts. I paused, my hand hovering over my bag strap. The library was empty. I'd checked. The security system was armed, save for my own access code. Nothing, just the regular, comforting geometry of books. I chalked it up to fatigue, the strain of hours spent poring over dusty archives and legal jargon. My mind was playing tricks, already eager to fabricate mysteries where none existed. It was a bad habit I'd picked up lately, a way of filling the vast, quiet spaces in my life. I walked towards the exit, the sound of my own footsteps amplified in the cavernous space. The hum of the computers seemed to follow me, a low, persistent thrumming that vibrated in the floor. Near the circulation desk, where a stack of returned books waited for shelving, I heard it again. A faint sound like a sigh or perhaps a rustle of paper. It was too soft to be distinct, too ephemeral to pinpoint. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. This wasn't fatigue. This wasn't my imagination. The sound was there just at the edge of hearing, like a secret shared just out of reach. "Hello?" I called out, my voice swallowed by the vastness. It sounded thin, reedy, utterly unconvincing. No reply, of course not. It was the building settling, I told myself, the old structure groaning under its own weight. Libraries, especially ones housed in older buildings, were full of strange noises. The ventilation system, the plumbing, the slight shifts in temperature all could create illusions of sound. I forced myself to walk on, but my pace had quickened. My shoulders hunched slightly. As I reached the main entrance, ready to disarm the alarm and step out into the crisp night air, my gaze fell upon the security desk. A small ceramic mug, the one the night supervisor always used for her herbal tea, had been moved. I was certain it had been on the left side of the desk when I'd last passed it, near the monitor. Now it rested squarely in the center, directly in front of the chair. It was a small thing, insignificant, yet it pricked at the fragile calm I was trying to maintain. I hadn't touched it. No one else had been here. A knot formed in my stomach. Was I losing my mind? The stress, the grief, the sheer upheaval of my life, it was a potent cocktail for delusion. I stood there, staring at the mug, trying to force a rational explanation. Had I moved it subconsciously? Had the cleaning crew come and gone, somehow missing me entirely? No, the alarm was still set. The building was empty. My skin prickled. I felt a distinct sense of being observed, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck that made every hair stand on end. It wasn't just the quiet library anymore. It was the quiet library watching me. The mug, innocuous as it was, felt like a deliberate act, a quiet challenge. It was too precise, too unsettlingly placed. I reached for the alarm panel, my fingers fumbling with the keypad. I needed to get out. I needed fresh air, the anonymity of the city streets. I punched in my code, the green light blinking a confirmation. The heavy door clicked open with a soft sigh of hydraulics. As I stepped through, I glanced back one last time into the vast, silent space. The rows of books, the glowing monitors, the perfectly centered mug, everything was exactly as it should be, except it wasn't. My name, or something very close to it. I stood frozen, my hand still on the door handle, my heart thudding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Had I truly heard it? The echo of that faint, chilling sound withered into the pervasive silence of the library. My hand remained on the cold metal of the door handle, gripped tight, a phantom vibration tingling in my fingertips. I strained my ears, holding my breath until my lungs burned. Nothing. Only the slow, rhythmic thud of my own heart, a frantic drum against the cage of my ribs. Had it been a trick of the old house? The creak of settling timber, a whisper of wind through a loose pane. My mind, a frayed rope, seemed eager to snatch at any rational explanation, no matter how flimsy. I let out the breath I hadn't realized I was holding, a shaky exhalation that fogged briefly in the air before dissipating. Fogged? I frowned. I pulled my hand from the door, wiping it absently on my jeans. The rational part of my brain, the part still clinging desperately to normalcy, tried to dismiss it as a draft, a faulty heating vent. But the sensation persisted, a lingering iciness that clung to my skin even as I took a tentative step back. A faint, almost imperceptible scent drifted to me then, something ancient and dry like dust disturbed from forgotten tombs, mixed with a metallic tang I couldn't quite place. It made my stomach churn. I took another deep breath, forcing myself to push past the creeping unease. I had come to this house for answers, for a new beginning. If something was here, if this house truly harbored an unseen presence, then I needed to understand it. I needed to know its history, its secrets. My gaze fell upon the closed library door, then shifted to the hallway beyond. The house was vast, filled with untold stories. I needed a starting point, a thread to pull. The internet. That was it. Local archives, historical records, anything that could shed light on this place. The air grew warmer as I moved away from the library, but the feeling of being watched, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, refused to dissipate. It was a subtle pressure, like standing just out of sight of someone, knowing they were there even if I couldn't see them. I found myself in the annex, a smaller room off the kitchen that had been converted into a makeshift office by a previous occupant. It was here, amidst stacks of outdated bills and yellowed correspondence, that I had set up my own laptop. But I needed more. This house, I was beginning to understand, demanded a deeper dive. I knew there was a public access computer lab in the nearest town, a small, unassuming building that doubled as a community center. It was a long drive, but the thought of escaping the house, even for a few hours, was a powerful motivator. I found the community center, a squat brick building with a faded sign, and pushed through the heavy glass doors. Inside, the air was warmer, smelling faintly of stale coffee and disinfectant. I moved past a silent janitor who offered a brief, tired nod and made my way to the back. There in a quiet corner was the library after hours, computers still logged in. A row of half a dozen desktop machines hummed softly, their screens casting a pale, bluish glow onto the empty chairs. It was late, and I was the only patron. I settled into a chair, the plastic seat cool beneath me. The familiar click of the mouse and tap of the keyboard were a comforting balm, a tangible connection to the outside world. I started with broad searches: Blackwood Manor history, owners of Blackwood Manor, unexplained events, town name, old house. The results were sparse at first. Property records, genealogical data, a few dry historical accounts. Nothing about an unseen presence or malevolent entity. My fingers flew across the keyboard, refining my search terms, digging deeper. I found an archived local newspaper article from the late 1800s detailing a fire that had ravaged a portion of the house, though it made no mention of casualties. Another, from the 1920s, spoke of a wealthy industrialist who had owned the property and mysteriously vanished, leaving no trace. The article chalked it up to financial woes, a desperate flight. That was a polite way of putting it. My heart gave a little skip. This was it, the first thread. I clicked on a link to a local history forum, an old, barely active message board. Scrolling through dusty posts, I found a thread titled "Old Blackwood Place Any Truth to the Legends?" My breath hitched. The posts were years old, some dating back a decade, but they were filled with fragmented stories. Strange lights in the windows, phantom screams, a pervasive sense of sorrow that clung to the property. One user, posting under the handle "Lore Keeper," had written, "My great-grandmother always warned us about that house, said it was hungry, not for food, but for something else. Said it fed on the lonely, the lost. Hungry, fed on the lonely, the lost." The words echoed the very feelings I had brought with me to this desolate place. The screen flickered then, a momentary jump in the display, and the faint hum of the computer seemed to deepen, vibrating subtly beneath my fingertips. I gripped the edge of the desk. Was it just the old machine? Or was something else, something far less benign, stirring even here, miles away from the house itself, drawn by my sudden focus on its secrets? My blood ran cold. Hungry. I gripped the edge of the desk, my grip tight against the cool plastic. Was it just a power surge or something else? A subtle response from the house reaching out even here into the sterile quiet of the library after hours, computers still logged in. I forced myself to breathe, a shallow, ragged intake of air that tasted of dust and old paper. The library was deserted, the rows of towering shelves casting long, distorted shadows in the dim security lighting. I was alone, truly alone, and the thought, instead of comforting, pricked at a fresh layer of unease. My fingers, surprisingly steady, returned to the keyboard. I needed more. The cryptic entry about the house, the one that spoke of hunger, was too vague, too unsettling to ignore. I dug deeper, searching local archives, digitized newspaper clippings, anything that mentioned the property or its former occupants. The digital breadcrumbs were scattered, frustratingly incomplete, but a pattern began to emerge. The first mention I found was a brief article from the late 1800s, detailing a peculiar pattern of misfortune that seemed to plague the owners of the property. A wealthy merchant, the original builder, had reportedly lost his entire fortune in a series of disastrous investments, then vanished without a trace, leaving only a note describing an unbearable weight and a constant, gnawing emptiness. The article concluded with a dismissive comment about the merchant's fragile constitution. My throat tightened. Fragile constitution, or something else entirely. I scrolled, the screen's glow reflecting in my wide eyes. Decades later, another owner, a reclusive artist, had been found dead in the house. This wasn't just bad luck. The years blurred on the screen. A series of short-term occupants, each leaving under a cloud of personal difficulties or unforeseen circumstances. Then a more substantial entry, a family, a couple with 2 young children who had purchased the house in the 1970s. The wife, according to an interview with a former neighbor, had become increasingly withdrawn, claiming the house watched her, that it fed on her sorrow. The husband dismissed it as postpartum depression, but a year later the entire family disappeared. No bodies, no trace, just an empty house and a lingering, unanswered question from the detective who had handled the case. what truly happened within those walls. My breath hitched. The screen seemed to swim. The hum of the computers grew louder, or perhaps it was just the blood rushing in my ears. Each story, each fragmented piece of history painted a picture of lives unraveling, of minds consumed by an unseen force. Loneliness, grief, despair, the very emotions I had carried with me into that house. The words from the previous entry echoed again. Hunji. My vision blurred for a moment, and when it cleared, a single new search result had appeared at the top of the list, highlighted in a stark, unnatural red. It was a link to an obscure online forum, a single post from a user named Watcher in the Walls. The post was brief, just a few lines. It doesn't just want your sorrow, it wants I. It twists you, consumes you. Don't let it in. This wasn't an archive. This was current, a warning. Someone else knew. Someone else had experienced this, but who? And why was it showing up now? I forced myself to close the browser, to shut down the computer. Back in my own bed, the house felt different, heavier. I closed my eyes, desperate for sleep, for an escape from the relentless churn of my thoughts. But sleep, when it came, offered no refuge. I was back in the house, but it was twisted, distorted. The walls pulsed faintly, a low, rhythmic throb that vibrated through the floorboards and up into my bare feet. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and cloying. I tried to move, but my limbs felt weighted, bogged down by an unseen pressure. It wasn't outside me. Then I saw it, or felt it, a presence. It pressed down, a crushing weight, stealing the air from my lungs. It spoke my name. My throat was dry, raw. I sat up, clutching the sheets to my chest, straining my ears. The house was silent now, utterly, completely silent. Or had something followed me home from the library, finally revealing its true intent? The silence was a thick, suffocating blanket. I jolted awake, drenched in a cold sweat, my heart racing. The room was still dark, but the pulsing throb from the dream seemed to linger, a phantom vibration in the floor. The house was silent, but it wasn't empty. I knew it. The feeling had burrowed deep past to the marrow. My vision swam for a moment, the edges of the room blurring. I blinked, trying to clear the haze. This wasn't right. The dream, the suffocating presence, it had followed me out of sleep. My breath hitched in my chest. I couldn't stay here, not now, not with that feeling crawling under my skin. It was past 3 in the morning, too late for anything, too early for comfort. I needed information, something tangible, something that existed outside these crumbling walls. A thought, sudden and sharp, pierced the fog of my fear. The town library. I remembered seeing a small sign near the entrance, something about extended hours, membership access after closing. It was a long shot, a desperate grasp at normalcy, but the idea, however faint, pulled me from the bed. I needed to know more about this place, about the people who had lived here before, about anything that might explain the suffocating weight that had settled over my life. I dressed quickly, my hands trembling as I buttoned my shirt. Each rustle of fabric, each soft creak of the floorboards sounded amplified, hostile. The front door groaned open, then closed with a soft click behind me, a sound that felt both like escape and abandonment. The drive to town was a blur. I found the library, a sturdy brick building, surprisingly well-maintained for this forgotten corner of the world. A small, illuminated keypad glowed beside the main entrance. I fumbled in my wallet for the new library card the town clerk had given me, the one I hadn't thought I'd ever use. The door clicked open. I stepped inside. The air was cool, dry, smelling faintly of old paper and something metallic like ozone. It was utterly silent, rows upon rows of silent knowledge. My footsteps echoed on the polished linoleum floor, each sound sharp and intrusive. I moved past the empty circulation desk, my eyes scanning for any sign of life, any indication that I wasn't entirely alone. No one, just the library after hours, computers still logged in. A bank of desktop monitors glowed softly in a far corner, a pale blue invitation. I walked towards them, the hum of the machines a low thrum in the profound quiet. This was what I needed: logic, data. The screen displayed a generic login page. I typed in my library card number, my fingers still stiff. Desktop loaded. I opened a browser, my mind racing. Previous owners, local legends, unexplained phenomena. I typed Blackwood Manor history into the search bar, the words appearing stark and clinical on the screen. The results populated, a mix of local historical society records and archived newspaper articles. I clicked on a link, an old article about the house's original owner, a reclusive merchant. The text was dry, factual, nothing alarming. I scrolled down, looking for anything unusual. My gaze drifted to the bottom of the screen. A small window, minimized and half-hidden, flickered. My heart gave a painful lurch. It wasn't part of the browser. It was a separate file, already open on the desktop. I hadn't opened it. I hadn't even seen it before. My hand hovered over the mouse, trembling. I clicked on the window. It maximized, filling the screen with stark white text on a black background. It was a journal entry. No, not a journal, a report. Entry 1, initial assessment. Subject designated Seth. Male, early 20s, recent losses, parents deceased, isolated, prone to introspection, exhibiting classic signs of grief, loneliness, and latent despair. Prime candidate for assimilation. The inheritance was a calculated lure. Location secured. My breath caught in my throat, my vision blurred. This couldn't be real. I rubbed my eyes hard, then looked again. The words were still there, clear and damning. It knew everything, my parents, my isolation, my grief, the house. I scrolled down, my fingers numb. Entry 2, observation phase. Subject shows signs of unease, subtle environmental manipulations initiated. Dreams, he questions reality. Good, the seed of doubt is planted. My chest tightened, a vice grip squeezing the air from my lungs. This was it. This was the entity. It wasn't just in the house, it was here. In this machine, reaching out, dissecting me. Entry 3, escalation. Subject's perception of time and space distorts. Memories begin to fray. He seeks external validation, a futile endeavor. The need for answers will only lead his back to us. His desperate search for truth will become his undoing. He believes he is looking for history. He is looking for himself. My body was shaking violently now. My hands flew from the keyboard, my chair scraping loudly on the floor. I tried to close the window to shut down the computer, anything to make it stop. The cursor, however, seemed to have a will of its own. It sounded like my name, stretched and distorted like paper tearing. I spun around, my heart racing, ready to scream. Nothing. Just the towering bookshelves, silent and still. The metallic smell in the air intensified, sharp and acrid. I whirled back to the screen. The text had changed. The entire report was gone. Only one phrase remained, shimmering on the black background, repeating endlessly, impossibly. I am already here, I am already here, I am already here. The words pulsed, a rhythmic throb that echoed the one from my dream. The screen flickered, the images on it twisting. The library, once a refuge, now felt like a trap. The air was thick, heavy, pressing down on me. I scrambled away from the computer, my legs like jelly. I didn't stop until I was in my car, fumbling with the keys, my hands slick with sweat. I drove, fast, away from the library, away from the town, back towards the isolated house. But the words, I am already here, echoed in my mind, a relentless drumbeat. Was I ever really in that library? Was any of it real? Or had the entity already twisted everything, even the outside world, into its own terrifying illusion? The words pulsed, a rhythmic throb that echoed the one from my dream. My own face, distorted, eyes wide with terror, flashed for a split second, then dissolved into something vast and formless, a swirling void that seemed to pull at my very essence. I stared, paralyzed, at the digital abyss. A low hum, not from the computer, but from the very air around me, vibrated in my teeth. I was in the library after hours, computers still logged in, a forgotten soul amidst rows of silent knowledge. The fluorescent lights above buzzed, a sickly white glow reflecting off the polished linoleum. My breath hitched, a dry, rasping sound in the profound quiet. My fingers, clammy and stiff, fumbled for the mouse. I needed to close the browser to shut down the machine, to make it stop. The cursor, when I finally managed to drag it, moved with a sickening lag as if the connection itself was resisting me. Not a cliché, a brutal, physical reality. The hum intensified. It wasn't a sound anymore, it was a presence. My gaze darted to the empty aisles, the towering shelves of forgotten volumes. I understand my sorrow. The words appeared slowly, deliberately, as if being carved into my vision. They weren't typed, they simply were. My stomach clenched, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't some glitch. This was it, the thing from the house. It had followed me. It had found me even here in this sterile, public space. It had reached out. Let me ease my burden. A strange warmth, not comforting but cloying, began to spread through my chest. It felt like a tendril coiling around the fragile edges of my grief, probing at the raw wounds of my loneliness. It spoke no discernible words, yet the meaning was clear, imprinted directly onto my consciousness. Release it. Let me in. It was a poison wrapped in silk. It was everything I had been fighting against, the very core of my despair made manifest. I recoiled, physically lurching back from the screen, scraping my chair across the floor with a shriek that echoed too loudly. I had to get help. I had to tell someone, anyone. My hand instinctively went to my pocket, fumbling for my phone. My fingers trembled as I pulled it out, the cold metal a small anchor in the rising tide of terror. The screen glowed, a familiar portal to the outside world. I scrolled to the contact for a colleague, a manager who sometimes worked late in another part of the city. Her name swam on the display, a beacon. My thumb hovered over the call button. I could hear the faint, distant thrum of the building's ventilation system, the only other sound besides my own ragged breathing. I pressed the call. The phone rang. Once, twice. Then a sharp, distorted crackle filled my ear like static electricity mixed with breaking glass. It wasn't her voice. It wasn't any voice. Just a cacophony of screeching, metallic groans that seemed to tear at the fabric of sound itself. My hand spasmed, dropping the phone onto the desk with a clatter. I snatched it up, frantically trying to wake it. Nothing, black, dead. The battery indicator, which had been nearly full just moments ago, was gone. I pushed back from the desk, standing on shaky legs. The words shifted again, subtly, new ones appearing. No one can help you now. The hum was everywhere. It vibrated in the floor beneath my feet, in the empty chairs, in the very air I breathed. It was no longer just a sound. It was a pressure, a physical weight. I felt an invisible presence moving between the aisles, a slow, deliberate glide that rustled no pages, disturbed no dust motes, yet I knew it was there. It was watching me. It was waiting. I swallowed, but it did nothing. It wasn't just my phone. It wasn't just the computer. It was everything. It had reached out, and now it was pulling me in. What did it want? What did it really want with me beyond the false comfort, beyond the promise of ending my loneliness? The hum was everywhere. I felt an invisible presence moving between the aisles, a slow, deliberate glide that rustled no pages, disturbed no dust motes dancing in the faint light. I stood in the exact center of the main reading room, surrounded by the silent, towering shelves, the quiet glow of monitors in the distance. My breath hitched, a thin, reedy sound in the vast, still space of the library after hours, computers still logged in. I told myself it was my imagination, a trick of the silence. My grief, my isolation, they were playing games with me. The exhaustion was getting to me. I had been in this library for hours, sifting through local archives, digital records, anything that might shed light on the house, on my family's forgotten history. I had found nothing concrete, just vague references to unexplained phenomena in the region, old newspaper clippings that dismissed strange occurrences as superstition. But the deeper I delved, the more a cold certainty began to bloom in my chest. The house wasn't just old, it was hungry. The hum intensified, a low thrum that burrowed into my bones. My teeth began to ache. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry, tight. The air grew heavy like the moments before a storm breaks, thick with unspent energy. I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the rows of books, the polished wooden tables, the empty chairs arranged with an unnerving precision. Each computer screen in the distance, left logged in by some careless student or forgetful librarian, cast a pale, blue-white rectangle onto the ceiling. They were like a scattered constellation in the dimness. I took a step, then another, drawn towards the bank of computers. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the insistent thrumming in the air. This was it. This was the edge. I could feel it. The rational part of my mind, the part that clung to logic and reason, was fraying, unraveling thread by thread. The hum was too real, too encompassing. It wasn't just in my head. As I neared the workstations, the glow of the screens seemed to pulsate almost imperceptibly at first. One monitor flickered, then another. My pupils dilated, trying to adjust to the shifting luminescence. My skin prickled with goosebumps, despite the stifling warmth that now permeated the room. The smell of old paper and dust was replaced by something else, a faint metallic tang like ozone before a lightning strike. I stopped before a monitor, its screen displaying the library's default search page. The cursor, a thin, blinking line, suddenly moved. It wasn't my hand on the mouse. It typed, slowly, deliberately. Each letter appeared with a soft, phantom click that only I could hear. Seth, my name. My breath hitched. I wanted to run, to scream, but my feet were rooted to the polished floor. My eyes were glued to the screen, watching the impossible. The cursor moved again, deleting my name. Then it began to type something else, something far worse. Then it continued, each letter a stab. Hungry, a tremor ran through me, a deep, uncontrollable shiver. My hands clenched into fists, nails digging into my palms. It knew. It was here with me in the library after hours, computers still logged in. It had followed me, or perhaps it had been waiting. The screen flickered violently, colors distorting. The default search page vanished, replaced by a single grainy photograph. It was an old picture, faded and yellowed, but undeniably clear. It was a photograph of my mother, smiling, vibrant, holding me as a child. A moment of pure, uncomplicated joy, stolen from a past I had tried so hard to outrun. My chest seized, a burning ache blooming beneath my sternum. Then the photo began to distort. The vibrant colors bled into a sickly sepia, then into stark black and white, like a negative. Her face twisted, the image pixelating, crumbling into digital dust. A low, guttural sound like stones grinding together emanated not from the speakers, but from the very air around me. I stumbled back, tripping over an empty chair, sending it clattering against a table. The hum had vanished. The metallic tang had evaporated. The screens were back to their default placid blue, but the image of my mother's corrupted face was burned into my retinas. My legs gave out. My breath came in ragged gasps, each one a desperate plea for air. It wasn't just a house. It wasn't just my grief. This was real. An entity. A malevolent, ancient thing that had fed on my despair, that knew my deepest wounds, and now it was playing with me. I was trapped. I had nowhere to go, no one to tell. What else did it know? The screen flickered, a stuttering gasp of light in the dim library after hours, computers still logged in. My breath hitched, a cold knot tightening in my chest. It wasn't just a glitch. I knew with a certainty that chilled me deeper than any draft that it was responsible. No movement, no sound beyond the low hum of the servers in the corner. Yet the air had thickened, grown heavy, as if some unseen weight pressed down on every molecule. My cursor, a tiny white arrow, trembled on the monitor. The search bar, previously filled with my frantic attempts to find any mention of the house's history, was now blank. In its place, a new window had opened, small and unassuming, titled only Log. It wasn't a web page, not a document I'd opened, not even a system error. It was just there, a text file, plain and unformatted, filled with a series of dates and cryptic entries. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the mouse. Every instinct screamed at me to close the window, to run, to pretend I hadn't seen it. But the determination, the desperate need for answers that had driven me here pushed back. I had to know. I clicked. The text scrolled, slow and deliberate, as if being typed out in real time, though no keys were pressed. The first entries were sparse, almost poetic in their brevity. 1872, the well runs dry. A child's cough rattles the walls. Asterisk. 1875, the farmer leaves, his grief a fine dust upon the floorboards. Asterisk. 1880, the widow stares at empty chairs. These weren't historical records, they were observations, and the language, it wasn't human. It was as if the house itself, or something within it, was recording the emotional decay of its inhabitants. My grip on the mouse tightened, grip tight. I could feel my own breath clouding in the air, a visible testament to the unnatural temperature drop. The entries continued, becoming more detailed, more horrifying. 1910, the young bride weeps, her despair a sweet wine. Asterisk. 1912, the sun hangs his head, his aimlessness a slow burn. Asterisk. 1920, it wasn't just observing, it was feeding. Loneliness, grief, despair, these were not just conditions, they were sustenance. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a ghost, it was something far more ancient, far more predatory. It thrived on suffering, cultivating it like a farmer tends a crop. Each date marked another family, another tragedy, another slow consumption. The names weren't there, only the roles. The emotional states. It didn't care about their identities, only their despair. The motive was laid bare, simple and monstrous: survival. It needed these raw, potent emotions to exist, to manifest, to grow. Then a sudden jump in the dates. The entries became fragmented, almost frantic. 1988, the architect alone, his longing a beacon. Asterisk. 1990, the architect broken, his spirit consumed. Asterisk. 1991, the family leaves, the architect, my great-uncle, the one who had vanished, leaving the house to rot. This thing had consumed him too. My eyes scanned further, my gaze desperate, searching for any hint of how it came to be. The text changed again, shifting from a simple log to what looked like an old, scanned document embedded directly into the plain text file. The font was ornate, faded, almost illegible in places. It spoke of ancient beliefs, of a forgotten place on the land long before the house stood. A place where the veil between worlds was thin, where certain energies gathered. It mentioned the quiet hunger, a presence that rooted itself in places of deep sorrow, growing stronger with each passing generation, each fresh tragedy. It wasn't a curse, not a demon summoned by a ritual. It was a natural predator of the soul, a parasite born of pain, made powerful by the very human condition it exploited. The house wasn't just its lair. It was its anchor, its physical manifestation in this world, built upon centuries of accumulating despair. And I, Seth, with my recent losses, my profound grief, my aimless wandering, was the perfect, ripened fruit. The screen flickered violently, not a gentle pulse this time, but a chaotic strobe. My reflection stared back at me, wide-eyed, pale. It wasn't just an absence of light, it was a presence, a shifting, undulating mass of pure, concentrated gloom. You are ripe. My breath caught, my muscles locked. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I felt a pressure on my shoulders, a crushing weight that forced me to slump forward, my face inches from the screen. Seth, his loneliness, his grief, his despair, a harvest. The full, horrifying truth was laid bare. I wasn't just in danger, I was destined. It had waited for me, cultivated me, drawn me in. And I understood with a clarity that shattered my remaining composure that escape was no longer an option. It wasn't just inside the house, it was inside me, a seed of despair it had nurtured, ready to burst. What could I possibly do against a thing that fed on my very essence, a thing that had existed for centuries, patiently waiting for its next victim? Escape was no longer an option, not in the way I'd once foolishly imagined, a clean break, a simple departure. The full horrifying truth was laid bare in the silence of the ancestral home. I was destined. It was here now in the library in the silence reaching for me. And I understood with a clarity that shattered my remaining composure that escape was no longer an exit. It was a confrontation. I was in the library after hours, computers still logged in, their screens casting a sickly blue glow over the deserted rows of desks. The building was a hushed mausoleum, every creak and groan of the old structure amplified in the vast quiet. I'd used a spare key a colleague had given me months ago, never imagining I'd be using it for this, slipping past the locked doors like a thief in the night. The air tasted of dust and stale paper, a metallic tang of ozone from the humming machines. My mind raced, a frantic hamster on a wheel. The entity fed on loneliness, on grief, on despair. It thrived on them, grew fat and powerful. I had to starve it. That was my only chance. If I couldn't leave, I could at least fight its insidious consumption. I began to type, searching for anything local folklore, historical accounts of strange disappearances, desperate attempts to banish or bind things that shouldn't be. My breath hitched in my throat with each new search term. The first few results were mundane, irrelevant. My eyes burned, tracing lines of text that offered no solace. Then a link appeared promising an obscure local history archive. My pulse quickened. This was it. This was the breakthrough. The page loaded slowly, each pixel crawling into place. A faded photograph of the ancestral home filled the screen, older, more dilapidated than I remembered even now. Beneath it, a block of text began to scroll. Accounts of the Blackwood family, recurring tragedies, an affliction of the spirit. My eyes devoured the words, looking for patterns, for weakness, for a name. The text blurred, then sharpened, then blurred again. A sudden, sharp pain lanced behind my eyes. The screen flickered, a glitching wave washing over the image. When it cleared, the photograph was gone, replaced by a single, stark sentence. I am already here. My fingers froze midair. The words pulsed, glowing faintly as if embedded into the very pixels. I tried to back out, close the tab, but the cursor wouldn't respond. It hovered, mocking over the single sentence. The hum of the computers around me seemed to deepen, morphing into a low, guttural thrum that vibrated in my chest. Was it just my imagination, twisting the mundane sounds of technology? I yanked my hand away from the mouse, my heart racing. I tried the escape key, then Control-Alt-Delete. Nothing. The screen remained locked, that single sentence burning into my retina. I closed my eyes, pressing the heels of my palms against them, trying to clear the image. When I opened them, the screen had changed again. The sentence was gone. In its place, a series of images flashed, too fast to properly register. My mother's face, pale and drawn, my father's empty chair, the desolate hallway of the ancestral home. Each image was a fresh stab of grief, a jolt of loneliness. It was feeding. It wasn't sound, not truly, but a thought, implanted directly into my mind. I seek to starve me? The scent of damp earth and something sickly sweet like decaying flowers filled my nostrils. I could feel its presence, a vast, unseen weight pressing down, forcing the air from my lungs. I pushed back from the desk, scraping the chair loudly across the linoleum floor. The noise echoed, a pitiful sound in the cavernous room. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself to stand. My plan to fight back by seeking knowledge, by denying it, had been a catastrophic miscalculation. It hadn't just anticipated my move, it had used it. It had drawn me out of the house, yes, but only to ensnare me more completely, to prove that there was no sanctuary, no escape from its reach, even in a public space. Every rustle of paper, every shift of the building was a deliberate movement, a stalking predator. I reached for my phone, my hand fumbling in my pocket. I needed to call someone, anyone, a colleague, an old acquaintance, even the police, though I knew how mad I would sound. Just a voice, a connection, a tether to reality. My fingers closed around the cold metal of the device. I pulled it out, thumbing the screen to life. No signal. A single, desolate bar. I tried again, moving closer to a window, then another. The library, usually a hub of information and connection, had become a dead zone. Cut off, my throat tightened. It wasn't just my perception twisting, the world itself was bending to its will. The entity was not confined to the ancestral home. It was here with me, mocking my desperate attempt at defiance. It had anticipated my every move, every fragile hope. I was alone, truly alone, and I could feel its tendrils, not just in my mind, but in the physical space around me, isolating me, weaving a tighter web. There was this what true despair felt like, knowing that every effort to break free only tightened the chains. The hum of the machine grew, no longer just a faint drone from the tower beside the screen, but a vibration that seemed to course directly into my fingertips. My hand, still frozen above the mouse, began to tingle. The words on the monitor, the ones that had arrested my breath, pulsed with a faint, sickly green light, like bioluminescent moss clinging to decaying wood. I could feel it, the cold seeping from the screen, not just into my eyes, but into my bones, a tendril of glacial air reaching past the glass. I tried to pull back, to wrench my hand away from the keyboard, but my muscles felt locked. My fingers were stiff, unyielding, fused somehow to the plastic keys beneath them. A faint, almost imperceptible warmth began to spread from the glowing words, a warmth that was not comforting but deeply unsettling, like a fever breaking in reverse. It felt like the pixels themselves were dissolving, becoming something else, something fluid and dark, leaching into the air around me. The library, after hours, computers still logged in, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cage. It burrowed into my skull, a low, resonant thrum that vibrated behind my eyes. My vision blurred at the edges, the neat rows of forgotten books on the shelves fading into indistinct blurs. Only the screen, with its pulsing words, remained sharp, terrifyingly clear. A tightening began in my chest, a slow, agonizing constriction that made each breath shallow, insufficient. It wasn't a panicked gasp, not yet, but a deliberate internal squeeze, as if an unseen hand were clenching my lungs. My skin prickled, then felt strangely numb, as though the blood beneath it had turned to sludge. I could feel something reaching, something invisible but undeniably present, extending from the screen, not at me but into me. This wasn't just a threat, it was a consumption. I felt myself being drawn forward, my chair scraping faintly on the linoleum floor, a sound swallowed instantly by the growing hum. My head dipped, my face inches from the screen, the green glow reflecting in my widening eyes. The words seemed to writhe now, not just pulsing but shifting, rearranging themselves into patterns that made no sense, yet conveyed an undeniable ancient malice. A faint, metallic scent, like old pennies left out in the rain, filled my nostrils, mingling with the dusty tang of old paper. It was the smell of something raw, something vital being stripped away. My thoughts became sluggish, heavy, grief, loneliness, despair. They were no longer just emotions, but tangible weights pressing down on me, growing heavier with each passing second, each vibration of the screen. This was it. This was the feeding. The entity, unseen but felt, began to siphon something from me. I didn't know what exactly, but it felt like the very essence of my being was being stretched thin, drawn out, and absorbed. My limbs felt impossibly heavy yet distant, as if they no longer belonged to me. My vision swam, not from tears, but from an internal draining, a dimming of my own light. It was a desperate, almost pathetic protest, but it was mine. It was a fragment of the Seth who still remembered walking under an open sky, who still recalled the smell of rain on dry earth, the sound of my mother's laugh. A flicker. It wasn't profound, not a revelation, but a simple image. My father, years ago, after a long day of work, sitting on the porch swing, exhausted but content. He hadn't said anything profound, just looked out at the setting sun, a quiet strength in his slumped shoulders. He hadn't given up, even when life had been hard. He had just been. It wasn't despair. It wasn't loneliness. It was a stubborn, inherent refusal to simply break. It was a spark. I pushed back, not with my muscles, which were still locked, but with that ember. I focused on the feeling of the porch swing, the faint scent of wood smoke, the warmth of the fading light. I didn't want to fight the entity's power directly. I wanted to deny it what it craved. I wanted to deny it my despair. A jolt, like a sudden electric current, shot through my arm. My fingers twitched a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, but it was my movement. The hum intensified, becoming a high-pitched whine that grated against my teeth. The metallic smell grew stronger, cloying, almost sickening. The words on the screen flickered wildly, the green light strobing as if protesting my defiance. The entity recoiled, not in defeat, but in surprise, in a momentary lapse of its perfect, hungry focus. I felt the pressure in my chest ease, just a fraction, allowing a deeper, ragged breath. My vision cleared, and I could see the outlines of the library shelves again, the comforting solidity of the physical world. My hand, still stubbornly glued to the keyboard, began to feel like my own again, the tingling sensation fading into a dull ache. I tried to pull it free once more, gritting my teeth, straining every nerve. The words on the screen pulsed one last time, a malevolent flare of green, then died, replaced by the standard black login screen. The hum from the computer tower subsided, returning to its faint, benign drone. I ripped my hand away, my fingers stiff and aching, leaving faint indentations on the keys. My body trembled, a violent shiver running from my scalp to my toes. I stumbled back from the desk, knocking my chair over with a loud clatter that echoed in the vast, empty library. I looked at my hand, flexing the stiff fingers, watching the grip tighten, then return to their normal pallor. Had I pushed it back, or had it merely decided to withdraw, satisfied with its partial feast? And what had it taken, really, from that brief, terrifying communion? The words on the monitor, the ones that had arrested my breath, pulsed with a faint, sickly green light, almost as if the screen itself was exhaling. My hand, still frozen above the mouse, began to tingle, a vibration that started in my fingertips and crawled up my arm. Symbiotic despair. Parasitic grief, severance, conscious rejection, sustained emptiness. My breath hitched. It wasn't a spell or a ritual or some arcane symbol I needed to scrawl in blood. It was a choice. The old records, digitized and tucked away in some forgotten corner of the library after hours, computers still logged in, had finally yielded their secret. The entity didn't possess in the traditional sense. It fed. It attached itself to the deepest wounds, the most profound absences, and it grew. It was a cancer of the soul, thriving on what I had in abundance: loneliness, grief, despair. And the key to its undoing wasn't a weapon, but a refusal, a conscious, sustained emptiness where it sought to feed. It had to be starved. The hum of the machine grew, no longer just a faint drone from the tower beside the screen, but a vibration that seemed to course directly into my fingertips, up my arm, and into my chest. The air in the library, normally stale and still, felt suddenly thick, heavy. A cold draft snaked around my ankles despite the building being locked and sealed. I knew with an icy certainty that had nothing to do with the draft that it knew. It felt my understanding, my intent. A low, almost imperceptible groan resonated through the floorboards, a sound too deep for the old heating system. My fingers, stiff and cold, finally detached from the mouse. I pushed back from the desk, the chair scraping loudly in the unnatural quiet. Each sound was amplified, stretched. The library felt vast, cavernous, the towering shelves of books looming like silent, knowing sentinels. I was alone, truly alone, and the entity was already reaching, but something had shifted. The knowledge had forged a new core within me, hard and unyielding. The despair was still there, a dull ache, but it was no longer a bottomless pit. It was a wound I could choose not to bleed from. I rose, my legs a little shaky, but my resolve firm. I had to go back to the house. It was where it was strongest, where it had taken root, and it was where I would face it. The walk to the exit felt like wading through treacle. The security guard, a stout woman who always seemed to be knitting, was nowhere to be seen. A faint, almost sickly sweet smell like decaying flowers wafted in. The journey home was a blur of heightened senses. The distant hoot of an owl sounded like a mournful cry. My old sedan, usually a comforting cocoon, felt exposed, vulnerable. Every snap of a twig, every glint of moonlight on a distant window made me flinch. The entity was not just in the house. It was in the air, in the very fabric of the night, trying to dissuade me, to break my nerve before I even arrived. When the house finally loomed into view, it was a silhouette against a bruised, moonless sky. It didn't just look derelict, it looked hungry. The windows, black and empty, were eyes fixed solely on me. The front door, usually a gaping maw, seemed to pulse with a faint internal light like a beating heart. I didn't hesitate. I pulled up the driveway, gravel crunching under the tires, and cut the engine. The sudden silence was absolute, suffocating. I gripped the steering wheel, gripped tight, and took a deep, shuddering breath. This was it. The front door creaked open at my touch, as if inviting me in. No resistance, no warning, just a silent, eager welcome. Every step I took resonated, not just through the floorboards, but through my own bones. The house was alive, and it was waiting. The furniture, draped in dust sheets, looked like hunched, waiting figures. It wasn't a sound of anger, but of a monstrous, ancient hunger now threatened. They stretched, lengthening, coalescing into something vast and formless. I could feel its immense weight pressing down on me, a physical pressure that threatened to crush the air from my lungs. My head began to spin. The familiar tendrils began to probe, seeking a purchase, a weakness. "You are alone, Seth, so utterly, irrevocably alone." My knees buckled slightly, but I straightened them. I focused on the words from the library. Conscious rejection. I acknowledged the grief, the loneliness, the despair. I didn't deny them, but I refused to let them be fodder. My chest felt like it was being squeezed in a vise. My vision swam. The cloying sweetness in the air became unbearable, thick and suffocating. "Give in, Seth. It's easier. It's always easier." I opened my eyes, my skin crawled, my stomach churned. I tasted bile at the back of my throat. This was the entity, its true form, a manifestation of pure, consuming absence. I focused on my breath, on the simple act of existing. It was excruciating. Every fiber of my being screamed for release, for the sweet lure of giving up. But I held fast. I chose to feel the pain, to acknowledge the emptiness, but not to let it be a conduit. I chose to starve it. The entity shrieked, a soundless scream that tore at the fabric of my mind. The pressure intensified, then, with a sudden, violent shudder, it recoiled. The cloying smell dissipated, replaced by the faint scent of dust and old paper. I gasped, falling to my knees, shaking uncontrollably. The room was still quiet. The silence was no longer heavy, but merely absent. Had it worked? Had I truly severed its connection, or had I merely driven it deeper, allowing it to regroup, to find another way to twist the knife? I opened my eyes. The shadows had solidified, not into a shape, but into a palpable presence, a looming, vast nothingness that filled the room, pressing against me from all sides. My skin crawled. My stomach churned. This was the entity, its true form, a manifestation of the void it carved within me. It didn't speak, didn't move, but its presence was a scream, a silent, deafening shriek that resonated in my bones. My breath hitched. My lungs burned, refusing to draw air. The air itself felt thick like syrup, making every attempt to move a monumental effort. My mind screamed surrender. Let go. It promised peace, an end to the gnawing grief, the crushing loneliness, but something flickered. A stubborn ember, deep within the frozen core of my being. Not the pain of loss, but the warmth of having known. The entity recoiled, just a fraction, a barely perceptible tremor in the suffocating presence. It wasn't enough. I needed more. I needed to feel it, truly feel it, against the crushing despair. I focused on the rough weave of the carpet beneath my hand, the faint scent of dust and old paper, the distant, impossible sound of a siren wailing somewhere far beyond the house. These were real. These were mine. A jolt. My body convulsed, a desperate, involuntary spasm. I felt something tearing inside me, a thread snapping. No, not again. I wouldn't be another name etched onto this house's forgotten ledger. I wouldn't. I clawed at the floorboards, my nails scraping against the aged wood, seeking purchase, seeking reality. It was trying to erase me, to consume me. But I was still here. My heart, against all odds, still beat a frantic rhythm. My breath, shallow and ragged, still stuttered in my chest. I was here. A roar tore from my throat, a ragged, guttural sound that felt alien even to my own ears. It wasn't a scream of fear, but of defiance. A rejection. I would not succumb. I would not become another empty vessel for this parasitic emptiness. The entity shrieked, a soundless scream that shattered the air around me, making my eardrums throb. It was a sound of pure hatred, of frustrated hunger. The pressure eased, then surged again, a final, desperate attempt to drag me under. I pushed back with everything I had, with every scrap of will, every fragment of memory that wasn't tainted by despair. My fingers found something solid, a splintered edge. I pulled myself forward inch by agonizing inch, away from the epicenter of the nothingness. It was a retreat, not a victory, but it was movement. It was escape. I burst through the front door, gasping for air, the night air cool and biting against my sweat-soaked skin. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to put as much distance as possible between myself and that house, that thing. I stumbled, fell, picked myself up and ran again. I don't know how long I ran or how I ended up here. Now I sit hunched over a keyboard, my fingers hovering, trembling over the keys. The screen glows with the faint, comforting blue light of an active search engine. It's late. The building is silent, save for the low hum of the servers and the distant thrum of traffic outside. I'm in the local library after hours, computers still logged in. A small miracle or a cruel joke, I can't tell which. My clothes are torn, my hair matted with sweat and grime, my body aching in places I didn't know existed. I must look like a madman. My eyes scan the empty aisles, the towering shelves filled with knowledge, with stories, with everything that entity sought to erase. Was it truly gone, or was it merely waiting, biding its time? My gaze drifts to the screen, to the search bar. What do I type? How to defeat a malevolent entity? Ancestral homes that feed on grief. It all sounds insane, even to me, after what I've just endured. I need proof. I need answers. I need to know if I'm truly free, or if I've merely delayed the inevitable. I type in the address of the house, my fingers stiff and clumsy. The first few results are real estate listings, old census data. Then an archived local newspaper article dated over a century ago. Tragic loss in isolated manner. Family perishes in unexplained circumstances. I click it. The article, yellowed and pixelated, speaks of a family, a succession of owners, each succumbing to what the local constabulary deemed melancholia or accidental demise. No mention of an entity, of course, but the pattern. It's unmistakable: loneliness, despair. My own recent past, mirrored in these dusty digital pages. Then I find it, not in the news archives, but buried deep in a local history forum, a discussion thread from years ago. A user, calling themselves The Chronicler, had posted a series of obscure folklore excerpts. My refusal, my desperate struggle, had been its undoing for now. Repelled, not destroyed, it's still there. The house is still there. My hands are shaking. I survived. I walked away. I am free of the house, but am I free of it? The glowing screen reflects my own haunted eyes. What happens now?